Got water? In a crisis, you may not. Today, Jim Phillips teaches us why water is so important and the steps you can take to make sure your family has what it needs in a crisis. Hey, Provident Preppers, I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Kylene.
And today we have Jim Phillips with us, and you are not going to want to miss this. This is going to be some great information. Jim has been teaching and living preparedness since I was in junior high, and that's a long time ago. Not to make you feel old, Jim, but that's a long time that you've been doing this, and we appreciate it because you are a true asset to the preparedness community, and we're here today to talk about water.
And I am a huge fan of Jim, so for me, this is totally an honor. Thank you so much for joining us, Jim.
Well, I'm glad I can be here. And, you know, if you live long enough, you learn something. So here in, 3 weeks, I'll be 75. And I've been playing with this stuff for decades and making a lot of mistakes. One of the reasons I know some of what I know is I've really bungled some things along the way. My background, science, technology, engineering. I love doing research. I want to understand, not just go off of a list. So anyway, my mission is to share, to teach other people.
And truly, that's how we learn so many things. We've done it in our lives. We try, we make mistakes, we figure it out, and we're smarter. So we appreciate you being here, and we appreciated visiting with you recently about low water gardening, how important that is. Some of us are living in drought right now, and it's been an extended drought, and you know, who knows when that's going to end. But today we want to really focus on maybe the more culinary side of water, drinking water and sanitation and some of those things. So kick us off, Jim. Tell us some of what you've learned and what is important for us to understand about water.
Well, getting started with what you said, now is the time to make mistakes. When you can correct those mistakes, when you can, even if you make a mistake that you get sick because you drank some contaminated water, well, now you can get help. During an emergency, when things are shut down, when you're remote, whatever it is that happens, short-term or long-term, you really cannot afford to get sick, because if you get sick, well, not only is it unpleasant, but it can also be deadly for you or for somebody else. If you're a caretaker of, children, infants, or what have you, or somebody else that's sick, you can't afford to be sick, because if you are, you can't take care of them, and that may be a threat to them. So it's not about just being thirsty. It's really about being safe. And that's why I consider water to be one of the parachutes. I talk about parachutes all the time, use that analogy, because if you jump out of a plane and you don't have a parachute, enjoy the ride. It's going to come to an end. And you have to treat water like a parachute. And the law of the parachute is that you have to have it before you need it, or ways to make it or purify it. You have to have it before you need it. You have to have it with you when you need it. You have to know how to use it. You have to actually use it, and it has to be of life-saving quality. And that's one of the areas that people make mistakes is they buy something or they build something that somebody showed them, but they don't really know if it works. Now's the time to find out. And the other point about water, particularly when we're talking about culinary water, what you drink, is that you don't have, in emergency, you do not have a way of testing that water. You can't tell it. Now, if it looks awful, smells awful, okay, you know it's not good then. But if you have crystal clear water, it could still have millions of bacteria, viruses, all kinds of nasty things in it, plus some chemicals. If there's no smell, no taste, no color, you could still become very ill from that water because you don't have a way to test it. So just like a parachute, you have to, when I talk about, preparing safe water, I talk about just kind of overkill. You have to overdo it. And so to me, that's why it takes multiple stages and experience to do things, because you just can't afford to get sick. That's the bottom line. It'll be very, very difficult. So that's one of the things that you need to consider is this is very serious. This can be life and death. And I just don't want to go there with the life and death thing, but it can be. And I want to prepare myself in a way that I'm confident that I will be okay with my water.
Okay, so let's jump into some of the critical aspects here. And we always teach our audience about the importance of having stored water. What can you tell us about having stored water? How much should we have? And how do we go about doing that?
Well, you can't have too much, but the problem is you can't practically store, massive amounts of it. So what I teach people is that you must have, now this is just for consumption only. This is just to preserve life. You're going to need to have 1 gallon per person per day. Now that's absolute minimum. 2 gallons is better, and you need to have, I like to think in terms of a month at a time. So if you think about that, then you need about a 55-gallon drum per person per month. And that's for consumption, and you might wipe off your face with a little bit of water, but you can't use very much for sanitation because you've got to be able to drink adequate amounts of water. And when you're in a lot of stress, maybe it's heat, maybe it's hot, maybe it's cold, maybe you're working hard, you have to be able to consume a gallon of water a day or more. And some of the things that people don't understand about water consumption is, I think most people understand that when it's really hot, and you're sweating and you're working, you're going to have to drink extra water plus the electrolytes that go with it, not just pure water. But what a lot of people don't know is when it's cold and it's winter and you may be working hard outside in particular, and the temperatures are below freezing and or below zero, you need more water than you do when it's hot. You dehydrate quickly. And so we're really talking about 2 issues with having safe water by storing it. We'll talk a little more about that, but you've got to have enough so that you can stay properly hydrated so that if it's hot or cold, you can be consuming what you need, because if you become dehydrated when it's hot, then you can't cool. When you stop sweating, we call it heat stroke, sunstroke, and you can't stay cool, the body overheats, and that becomes fatal. And then when it's too cold, if you become dehydrated, then you can't stay warm. Basically, your furnace goes out, is the way I describe it, because water is used in the metabolism of foods, but also to distribute the nutrients around, the oxygen and everything. And if you become dehydrated, you get cold, and then you can get cold enough that hypothermia sets in and, may not make it, or certainly it's uncomfortable and you can get hurt. So you must have water that you can drink right now. When the emergency occurs, when things are shut down, whatever it is, whether it's long-term or short-term, you've got to have water that you can stay hydrated right from the beginning. And then if it's going to be a long-term event, you've got to work on the problem of how do I solve my long-term issue. That's where being able to, harvest water and purify it becomes very, very important to you. So store lots of water is the bottom line. And if somebody says, well, I have a well, that's good. You have a well, that's stored water underground, but the point is, well, it's underground. Can you get it out of the ground? So you might want to learn some ways of doing that if the power's off, and hand pumps and things like that, well buckets. So you need to have it. That's what I call expedient. I can use it right now. It's safe. I don't have to do anything to it. No purification, nothing. Drink the water. That's expedient, and have enough that you can stay hydrated while you're solving the rest of your problems.
And I like the way you put that, because truly what that stored water does is buys you time, right?
Yes.
I mean, hopefully it gets you through the crisis, but there's a chance it won't get you through the crisis, but it's buying you enough time to get things figured out. And that gets us to step number 2, which is finding and making water safe to drink. So enlighten us.
Well, about finding water, first off, there is water in your house. If you understand where it is, where it would be hidden, some of the things that you can use. But again, you should have it stored in your house so you're ready to go. Now you've got that. I found where that water is. It's in my storage room, wherever it is. Okay, I'm using that water and I want to be replenishing it. So the first place you may want to look is in your house. Now, if it's an event that occurs, one of the things you might want to consider doing, and this takes a little bit of thinking about, when you want to cut off the water to the house, if there's going to be a chance that the water supply to the house is going to become contaminated on this municipal supply, then you want to close the water valve. Now, what you have is water that's stored in your pipes and in your water heater, and you can get at that water. What a lot of people don't know about the water heater, because there may be 40 or 50 gallons of water there, or maybe you have 100 gallons of water, is the ability to get it out of the water heater. And if most people are not thinking about that, if you have hard water, like we have hard water here, it's so hard it clinks when it falls into a glass. And you've got this calcium that's in it that'll build up in the bottom of a water heater from the heat, and then you got all the scale in there. And that valve down at the bottom, you can't open it. I mean, well, you can open the valve maybe, but the water won't come out because it's all blocked. Something people can be doing to prevent that, when you have a new water heater, or if you can still get water out that drain valve, run a hose over to a drain in the floor, flush the water heater. And what you really should do is flush it once a month. Go open that up, let it run real fast for, half a minute, shut the valve so that you're blowing out the sludge that's in the bottom so you can get at that water and just drain it out. And one of the other things you have to do too, if you've cut off the pipes or cut off the supply to the house, is to get the water out of the water heater, is you got to let water into it. Two ways you can do that. You can open a valve in the house, particularly if you have a second story, and or the relief valve that's on the side of it, open that so air can get in so it'll come out the bottom. If it's limed up, it's a little more difficult because now you have to basically disconnect the water heater, the pipes, and the gas valve or electric. Be careful with that. Be sure you know what you're doing. You may have to lay that water heater down, but at least it's inside your house, and it would be technically safe water to drink, unless you've allowed your water to become contaminated in the house. You have other things around that may have water in them, but they're hard to use directly. That's water beds and hot tubs and things like that. A lot of chemicals in there. So you can use those for sanitation. You may have 2-3 gallons of water in all the pipes in your house if you can get to a low area to drain them. So that's where you'd go first. Now you're looking outside. And this is something that you ought to do in preparation, is know where there are potential sources of water. Know where there may be springs or streams or ponds or lakes or things like that. Now that water may not be safe to drink. If it's going to be water that's coming from an artesian well or a spring, you want to get right up close to the mouth of where that's coming out, because that will be the safest point, because as it flows out on the ground, it gets contaminated very quickly, depending on what the event has been. So go right to the head of those springs or those wells that may be flowing. And other than that, you're going to be looking at rivers, ponds, and streams. And just because it looks clean, you have to assume during an emergency, you must assume during an emergency, that every bit of surface water is highly contaminated and deadly. Now, that's to be very conservative, because you can't afford to get sick. You may have drunk out of that stream many, many times in the past, never got sick. You can't assume that you won't get sick the next time, so you must process that water once you get a hold of that water. And that brings in the different processes that you would use for water. But know where the water sources are before the emergency comes is what you want to do, where you can go quickly and easily. Of course, you have to have a way of transporting that water. So think about that. How am I going to haul that water? And then what do you do if you don't have any transportation? Well, how far can you carry water? Have the buckets and things like that. So this, sometimes people go like, oh, this is too much, I don't want to think about it. Well, I hate to wait until now I'm standing around saying, what the heck do I do now? You want to figure out what the heck to do now while you have a chance to say, well, I need to make provisions by having the containers, by having a way of moving it, wheelbarrows, hand trucks, things like that, to take 5-gallon buckets if that's what it takes.
Yeah, and water is heavy. So if anybody's carried, some jugs of water for a ways, that water's heavy. So yes, knowing where to get it and how you can transport it, very important. Very, very important.
It is. And of course, if you look and say, well, my water sources are 5 miles away, that's going to be that'll be an incentive to say, I need to store more so that I don't have to go every day or start hauling that water right away, because maybe things will come back. However, don't make that assumption when something serious has gone on and there's loss of communication, power, whatever it is, all these things, you start adding up the hints and saying, this is serious. It's not going to end tomorrow or maybe next week, or I don't know how long. And you have to make that decision early on, so you determine how serious I have to get. And you may want to start transporting water before you run out. There's an old Bedouin saying that says, dig your well before you're thirsty. Well, you need to be getting sources of water back and purifying it before you're thirsty, because once you're thirsty, once you get dehydrated, your ability to work goes downhill very quickly. Most people have never been seriously dehydrated in the heat or the cold or those things, and they don't understand how that saps your strength and your ability to work. It's very serious, and you can lose your ability to haul water because you just get weak. And that's one of the things people don't understand. You get weak when you become dehydrated. You get hot, or you're getting cold. You can't stay warm. So you want to be aware of those things and just simply know that you can take care of yourself.
Very good. Very good. Okay, so what are some of the common maybe misconceptions or the problems that people run into? Things that maybe weren't real good judgment, but let's learn those right now and see what we can do to make sure we don't make those mistakes.
Well, of course, the first ones we've kind of covered that a little bit. Just be sure you have lots of water stored, as much as you possibly can have stored, so you've got it. Then the problems that people run into is if they haven't figured out where their sources of water are, now they're wandering around. And if they don't have a car or a means to move around to find it, now you're going like, well, where the heck is there any water? So solve those problems up front. Now, once you know where the sources of water are, then you have to, and again, assume everything is highly contaminated with bacteria, viruses, parasitic worms, protozoa, those kinds of things. And you must be sure that you can take care of those things by several means. And you need to understand all the different ways that you purify water. And we're talking now about consumption, but you're also going to need to have water that's good enough for sanitation and cleaning and for the food production, meaning gardening or growing or taking care of animals. So there are just a very few ways that you can purify the water, and those are very simply, well, one of them is, we hear a lot about is, well, heat. You know, heat will, in terms of killing the microbes in the water, heat will take care of them. So if you have a way of heating the water, bringing it to a boil, then that'll take care of them. You have chemicals that you can use. Well, that can be good. Be sure that you don't have a reaction to those chemicals, that they're not going to hurt you. And then you have to understand that you can take care of water by filtration. Now, filtration can be a little bit dubious, and that's where people make a lot of mistakes, is they think they can get a little cheap little water filter and that'll take care of them. In fact, if you want to go to reliable sources, or we think in terms of getting to a reliable source, you can Google online with the FEMA and Red Cross on ways of purifying water, food and water. They have things on that. And here's the thing that I think will be interesting to people is when you get that document from FEMA and the Red Cross, they only recommend three different ways of making water safe. One is boiling. Another one is with chlorination, and the other one is by distillation. They don't even mention filters, but you have to understand, I'm not saying that we don't use filters, but the reason they don't mention filters, and they give the reason very clearly, is that most people have a tendency to want to, I need a filter, so I'll just get one of these cheap little countertop filters, you know, and put it in the refrigerator, and that'll take care of me. Well, when you're dealing with what is basically pretty safe water anyway, and you have just a few microbes in it, those will do just fine because they take out 99.99%. Okay, if you're talking about 300 and you're going to take out 99.99%, that'll take care of them. And your body is designed, its immune system, that it can handle small quantities of some of these little bugs. I mean, a few of them, a handful, 3, 4, 5, 10. But if you were to ingest hundreds or thousands of them, some of them are very, very virulent, then that'll get you. So a water filter that takes out just a small percentage of them, and now you're dealing with water that has hundreds of millions or billions of these little critters in there, and what gets through is, well, okay, a few 100,000 get through because it's only 99.99%. So they don't recommend filters for that reason. The other one is that most people don't know how to care for filters, and the cheap ones, you can puncture them if you're pumping through them or things like that. So since they're writing that for the lowest common denominator, they're going to say chlorination is reliable as far as taking care of bacteria and viruses. Now, it will not touch cryptosporidium or giardia. That's one of the things you have to understand. If you've got that in the water, you have to either filter it or you've got to kill it with heat, because heat will take care of it. And of course, heat means that you have to have a heat source, electricity, natural gas, propane, whatever it is. So you've got to understand the balancing act you have to go between these different ways of doing it. Chlorination does a good job of bacteria and viruses, but it doesn't touch the protozoa, and those can be really nasty. So, and then distillation is nice, but it's the amount of heat that it takes. It's extremely inefficient. Even if you buy one of the, I'll say some of the survival stills that are promoted and things like that, and making a little bit of distilled water can be nice, but where you need to consume for a family of 4, you've got to have, a minimum of 4 gallons per day or more. The amount of heat that it would take, if you're talking about white gas or propane, It takes about half the volume of the fuel to make it with one of those stills, which is very inefficient. They're terribly inefficient. The natural gas is working in electricity, go ahead, because you can kind of waste it. But if now you're working off your stored supplies, then you probably don't have enough to make the water that you need. So understand that. That's why we talk about going to filtration, but it has to be a good quality, high quality filtration. And even with that, you're going to have to use multiple stages. I do not ever recommend that you're going to go with a one-stage system, just a simple pump or a countertop drip filter. They're great, what they will do, but they're designed to be working with water that isn't highly contaminated. It's going to be your stream water right now, your lake water right now that's, it's got some bugs in it. But after an event where you have lots of maybe raw sewage being dumped into streams and lakes and ponds, after there's been people living upstream that are not sanitation conscious, and you're getting all kinds of ugly things dumped in the water. There's things dying and falling into what have you. You're talking about things that are extremely contaminated. And we don't like to think about that, but I think about it in terms of this is a parachute. It has to work. So if you're going to use a filter, you're going to use multiple stages. That's what I teach in some of my water classes. If you have one of those nice countertop drip filters, the Aquarain, British Berkfield, Catadine, one of those, there's some other names out there that use the ceramic filters. Nice piece of equipment. But the water that you want to put in it needs to look like it's good enough to drink. It needs to be clear, really clear, not just a little fuzzy in left end. It wants to be very clear. So you're going to go through multiple stages of filtration ahead of that. I'm going to recommend at least 2 or 3 of them in continuing fineness of the strainer, if you will. I'm trying to think of the right word here, the sieve that it's going to go through. So I would start out with something like a 20 micron filter, and then move to, say, a 5 micron filter, then maybe a 1 or a half micron filter, because those filters are designed as a 0.2 micron. 0.2 micron will take out all bacteria. It'll get some of the viruses, but it won't get all of the viruses. So now I actually have a 4-stage system as a minimum. 3 stages ahead, my bacteria filter, and then realizing that even though the specifications say, on some of them say, well, it takes out, but they don't give you absolute numbers is the problem. Takes out viruses also. How many? What percentage? And here again, even if it's a percentage, how many are in the water that you have to take care of? So I'm going to post-treat any filtered water that I have, usually with chemical or heat, so that I know I've got them. And the toughest of the bacteria or viruses to kill is hepatitis A. Hepatitis A is the one that you're worried about the most. And when you see it listed that you need to boil water for 2 minutes, it's because we know that after 2 minutes of boiling water, rolling boil, hepatitis A is killed. Now, it's probably killed sooner than that, but you can't afford to get the darn thing.
Yeah.
True.
All of the bacteria and other things are killed by the time you get to boiling temperature. They're dead. In fact, 160 degrees for 10 minutes, it's going to kill off almost everything.
Yeah.
But we boil it because we want to be sure that we get everything. So boiling or chlorination or iodine after the fact that you filtered it, that will take care of viruses.
So I have a question for you though, Jim. Why are you doing that after instead of before? Because like for me, I like to do that before. So then my Berkey will remove the chlorine, and then the water that I have is good. So help me understand why you're doing that after filtration and not before.
Well, you can put it in before, but the thing you have to understand is if you have turbidity in the water, there's cloudiness in the water, the chlorine isn't going to get everything. So I'm still going to have to treat it afterwards. And the easiest way to remove chlorine from the water will be with a carbon filter. Now, the Berkey in these, they have carbon inside of them, so they'll remove the chlorine. So you get rid of it because you really don't want to drink it all the time. For a short period of time, it's okay.
Yeah.
And most people are drinking chlorinated water anyway. But if you put it in ahead of time, you can't guarantee that you're going to kill all the critters because some of them may be down in one of those tiny little mud balls in there. And or also the turbidity in the water and the organics in the water are going to react with the chlorine, so you may not get enough in. One of the other reasons you do it after the fact and you let it stand while it's still working is when you've let it set for its 30 minutes that it needs to have, I still want to have a little whiff of chlorine. You can have chlorine strips, but you have to store them and they age and what have you. No, if you can smell chlorine, you've got enough left. And it just wants to be that little bit of chlorine smell then I know that the chlorine has had time to react with everything that would be in there, and there's still some left over. In other words, it's overkill. You want enough chlorine to overkill. So dose it ahead of time if you want to, but I want to put it in after the fact to be sure that I've taken care of those things, because when you don't have medical services or people to help you, you cannot afford to get dysentery. They can be very unpleasant, but also it can be dangerous for you or other people when you can't get the care you need.
Very good points. Very good points.
So, and I do actually on my website in this members area, and there we have it's a 5-hour water course. So, and I want to go into things in depth to teach the principles of how and why things work and the stages you kind of want to go through these different stages of filtration. You also have ultraviolet that you can use, either man-made ultraviolet or the sun for sodas or things like that are very useful. And you want to learn all of the different processes, because let's say it's a long-term event and or you were caught someplace where you don't have all of your material supplies. You want to understand the principles of how and why things work so that you can look around and say, okay, I don't have what I wish I had and what I have at home, but I've got to take care of this problem because I may not get home if I get sick. So you want to be able to understand the processes involved. And so you can look around and say, I will do the best I can with what I have. Ideally, you're carrying things with you when you're traveling, but things happen.
Yeah.
There's only so much I can carry on an airplane. Can't even take my pocket knife, which is irritating. Yeah. That's such an important tool. But you can look around and say, what can I substitute if you understand the principles of how and why things work?
And I think that's one of the reasons why solar water disinfection appeals to me so much, because all it takes is a plastic bottle or a glass bottle and putting it out in the sunshine, right? And,
right, clear.
And I think that's amazing, because is it ideal? Probably not. But can it effectively work? Absolutely. Yeah. And so knowledge is power, knowing and understanding.
You do the best you can. Of course, if you live in the Pacific Northwest where it's cloudy almost all the time, it won't work.
Yeah.
You've got to have really bright sunshine. And if you have a little bit of cloudy or overcast or it's intermittent sun in there, then you have to leave it longer. Yeah. You may have to give it 1 or 2 days or 3 days out there to do it. Also, oxygen. That's the reason why flowing streams and brooks that tumble a lot, they're typically going to be safer. They can still have things in them, particularly the protozoa will be in that moving water, but the bacteria and viruses get wiped out pretty quickly. And also, if there's sunshine in that water, then it cleans it up pretty good. Stagnant water. And I just did some experiments with these ceramic filters to show how quickly they plug, and they plug more quickly than you're being told because they're designed to strain out all the things, and that's why you have to go through these multiple stages ahead of that filter, so that by the time it's getting down to that 0.2 micron filter, you're only putting things in there that are going to be above the 0.2 micron up to maybe a half micron, so that's not a lot, and that filter will run thousands of gallons. But you can plug it, as a matter of fact, in the experiment that I just did, using some pond water that's not too far away. And this is one of the brand new ceramic filters, the black filter on that. At about 10 gallons, it's plugged. Wow, so you have to pre-treat it. Very, very important that you pre-treat it with getting the other stuff out.
Yeah, that's super fast. Jim, this is awesome. Thank you so much for this information. Tell us more about where our viewers can go to sign up and to attend one of your classes.
Well, I do classes. I do live classes every Wednesday night, and also on Saturday mornings, Q&A, open forum. Anybody can come. We would want to get my newsletter, which they can register for it on the website, jimsway.com, www.jimsway.com. It's the Provident Living Times. I send that out each Monday, Tuesday for the Wednesday class, and then they're free. You can just attend those things. The other thing on my website, I have 2 libraries on there. I have one library that says right up top, library, and in that I have several dozen of the classes that I've been doing, both the Wednesday night classes and others, that I post them in there, and they're just available for people to go through. I also have about 50 classes I'm still trying to edit and get up, so there's more coming all the time. And then we have a members area it says members only. And what that is, I have some of these, I call them very premier classes, just 5-hour water classes in there. And the registration for it is $5.99 a month. And somebody could sign up, watch all the classes in there, and check out, sign out. That's fine. I don't care. It's a train, but it helps me cover some of the expenses of some of the things I'm doing to make these experiments and everything. And that's really my only source of income for doing things right now, is the information that I sell through to the members. And so I encourage people to join, but lots of free classes. I also have a YouTube channel that I'm putting things in and trying to catch up on that. I'm on Facebook. And my whole purpose is to teach. That's all I'm trying to do, is teach. Don't sell anything else other than information.
You are a fantastic teacher, and that's something I really appreciate about you, Jim. So we are definitely members, right? We really appreciate what you're doing. Before we leave, I do have one question for you that we hear from our audience a lot, and we've only got just a couple minutes, so we'll have to do a quick answer. But when it comes to water storage, are you a fan of pre-treating or treating before you consume?
Well, I'm going to say yes. Now, what I mean by, and I don't mean to dodge that. What I do is the water that I put into storage, and of course, there's a whole issue you need to understand about the kinds of containers, what you put them in, why, and what kind of water. That I'm going to run filtered water, but I want hard water in my storage containers, because most of the time we're going to be storing them in plastic. I don't store reverse osmosis water or distilled water because they will have more of a tendency to leach some of the plasticizers out of it. So anyway, I'm going to pre-treat by filtering my tap water that I know is good to start with, and it's going to be highly filtered, and so that I'm not putting any bacteria, viruses, or protozoa in it, and that water will store indefinitely. I don't rotate water. If you have a good sound container, and you put in there good sound water, that's pure water, it won't grow anything. So I just store it. Now, when it's time to consume that water, if the water ever looks funny or you see something swimming in it, never seen that happen, but I mean, if you did, then it's got, or if it smells. I had one bottle of water, because a lot of times we'll store them in the 2-liter bottles. If you didn't clean it perfectly, you didn't get it rinsed out and use a little bit of chlorine wash in it, there might have been just a little bit of sugar in there, and then if in the process of filling it, you got a little bacteria in there, they could grow and multiply. Apparently, I did that with one of my bottles, and it ended up, when I opened it, it smelled off. It didn't smell like nothing. It smelled like, ooh, that's a little bit of a sulfur smell. That's when something has been without oxygen in it, as consuming the oxygen, it goes anaerobic, and that's what makes the smell. And so if it smells funny or looks funny, I'll just treat it. But I've only had one bottle ever fail on me that I've ever seen. So you want to be ready to post-treat and then pre-treat water. You can pre-treat it if you want. I don't put chlorine or iodine in my water when I put it in storage because of its reactivity with plastic.
Okay.
It's good information.
Good to know. Good to know. Thank you.
Yeah. And we encourage you to check out Jim's website, jimsway.com. We'll put a link in the description. Such amazing information, and just a great man to be taught from. So thank you, Jim. We appreciate you spending some time with us today, and we'll.
So for the question of the day,
yes, we'll have a question of the day.
How are you storing your water? What are you doing to make sure that your family has safe, clean drinking water, regardless of what happens in the world around you? Comment below. And thanks for being part of the solution.